Masechet Sotah Daf Mem Aleph. We hope to finish the 7th perek. We're speaking now about the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, how he has to recite the blessings in Hebrew, and then we're going to see in the next Mishnah about the king who recites Hakel, also in Hebrew. Okay, so Vekore ve'acharemot ve'ach be'asor. When the Kohen Gadol takes out the Sefer Torah, he reads Acharemot and Ach be'asor from Parashat Acharemot, all the laws of and the sacrifices of Yom Kippur, and then Parashat Emor, where it talks about Yom Kippur as well. The question is, how is he allowed to do that? He's reading from one Sefer Torah, and so he's skipping from chapter 16 to chapter 23, which is not very far away, but nevertheless, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Megillah that says you're allowed to skip in Navi. When you're reading the Haftarah for Navi, you can skip from one chapter to another one, but you're not allowed to skip in the Torah. You have to read straight through. So how is he allowed to skip from 16 to 23? Amar Abaye la kashya, kan b'chedei sheyifsok haturgeman, kan b'chedei shelo yifsok haturgeman. When the Mishnah over here says that you're not allowed to skip when you're reading Torah, that's talking about a length that is longer than it would take the translator to translate the pasuk. In other words, the person reading, let's say from chapter 16, the Kohen Gadol, he's reading Sefer Torah, or anytime a Baal Koreh is reading, and you have a Turgeman next to him who's translating into Aramaic. So as soon as the Baal Koreh finishes the pasuk, he can start turning while the translator is translating into Aramaic. How long does it take to translate the pasuk into Aramaic? Let's say 5 seconds. Maybe he'll say it in a little bit longer. Stretch it out. 10 seconds. Okay, can you turn the Sefer Torah from chapter 16 to 23 in 10 seconds? Yes, you can. And so therefore it's permitted. Whereas in the Mishnah that said you're not allowed to skip in Torah, the prohibition is only if it's going to take longer to turn the Sefer Torah than it will take for the translator to read a pasuk, because then everybody's going to have to be waiting while you're still turning it, and that would be Torah Sibur. So as long as it does not add any extra time, it's permitted. And here, it's only a short way. It's only a few perakim, and so it's permitted. Hold on. Veha ala katane. We have a braita commenting on that Mishnah in Masechet Megillah. It says, Medaligin ben Aviv and Medaligin batorah. Vad kama medaligin ad kedosh lo yifsok turgeman. Mechlal de batorah kelal lo. The Baraita explains that when this Mishnah says you can skip in Navi, how much can you skip in Navi? Only as much as the time it takes the Turgeman will not have yet concluded his translation. They would have a translator also for the Haftarah. So when you can skip a Navi, that's limited only to a short part, section away in Navi. But you see, this limitation is only regarding Navi. For Torah, there's no dispensation at all. You're not allowed to skip even one pasuk for Navi, for Torah. And so therefore, this is a problem, because even though if it's a short way, in Torah, you're not allowed to skip at all. Abaye explains, oh no, this Braita, when it says you're not allowed to skip in Torah at all, that's talking about when it's two different topics. It's confusing. People are reading. Remember, people didn't have chumashim that they printed chumashim. They're listening to what he's saying. You're not sure where he is, and he's skipping from. Not only is he skipping from one chapter to another chapter, he's also skipping from one topic to another topic. Then that's confusing. So in Torah, you're not allowed to skip at all if it's a different topic. However, if it's within the same topic and it's close by, then it's permitted. And that's true here. Both sections are about Yom Kippur, and they're close by. Vehatanya, this Vehatanya is not a question, but rather a proof. Right? We have a Braita that supports Abaye's interpretation of the Braita above that says Medaligin baTorah b'inyan echad u'b'navi b'shnei inyanin. You're allowed to skip in the Torah only if it's in the same topic, but in Navi you can skip even from one topic to another. V'chan b'chdei shelo yifsok haturgeman. But in both cases, you can't delay and make people wait. So it has to be within the time that it would take for the translator to conclude his translation. The Baraita adds that you're not allowed to jump from one book of Navi to the next. You can't go from Yeshaya to Yirmiyahu, even if it's at the end of Yeshaya and the beginning of Yirmiyah. That's too much of a break. However, if you're talking about Terei Asar, which are 12 individual Nevi'im, but they're all collected into one book, those Nevi'im, I'm sure they said many things, but we don't remember and write down everything a Navi says because they're short. If you have just a couple of pages, it'll get lost. In order to preserve them better, all those 12 Nevi'im, their prophecies that are preserved are put into one book together. But now they're in one book, so it's considered, in fact, one book. So it's okay to skip from one Navi to one Terei Asar to another section of Terei Asar, another Navi, as long as you don't go from the end backwards to the beginning. You shouldn't go backwards, you should only skip forwards. Okay. So then it says the Kohen Gadol, after he reads those two sections from Vayikra, he says, more than what I have read is written here, and then he reads Parashat Pinchas by heart. We ask, וכל כך למה שלא להוציא לעז על ספר Torah? Why does he have to announce that the following thing that I'm going to say by heart about the korbanot from Parashat Pinchas is written in the Sefer Torah? Why does he have to say that? Why can't he just go ahead, say the Pisukim without an announcement? Because people will not know and will think that, the Sefer Torah must be pasul, it's missing some section from Parashat Pinchas. That's why he's not reading it inside, and he's reading it by heart. So he has to announce, listen, this is a complete Sefer Torah, this is written in here. I just don't want to waste everyone's time and wait till I have to turn all the way to the end of Bemidbar. And so that's why he announces it's in here. So that's why he reads from it's called the book of Numbers, like in English. So too is the original Hebrew term. They didn't call it Sefer Bemidbar, but rather Chumash HaPekudim, the book of counting, the book of Numbers, and that he recites by heart. Question: why doesn't he turn it? Now, actually, we already know the answer because we mentioned it above. Amarav Huna Bar Yehuda Amarav Sheshat Afish En Golelin Sefer Torah Besibur, because you should not turn a Sefer Torah in public, because then everybody's going to have to wait. So it's Torah Sibur. Actually, this is the source. We were assuming it before, and but this is where Rav Sheshat actually says it explicitly, the reason why you should not. And now we ask, okay, fine, you don't want to waste everybody's time, so why not bring two Sifrei Torah, like we do when we have to read two sections? Bring two Sifrei Torah. Ravuna Bar Yehuda Amar Mishum Pegamo Shel Rishon. So one reason is because of the flaw in the first. And that's what people will think, that there's a flaw in the first. If you have one Sefer Torah and then you put it aside and you read from a second, people say, why are they reading from the second one? Oh, it must be the first one is pasul. That's not true, and we don't want people to think that. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar lefi she'en mevarachin beracha she'ena sericha. Resh Lakish is a different reason, because the Kohen is going to say beracha on the first Sefer Torah, and then if he has a second Sefer Torah, he's going to have to say another set of berachot. And that would be a beracha that's not necessary to say. Beracha she'ena sericha is an important concept, right? It's when you could do something without saying extra berachot, so then you shouldn't go and do it that way, right? If there's a way that you could do it without saying extra unnecessary redundant berachot, and so therefore he should have just one Sefer Torah. He says all his berachot on that Sefer Torah, and not bring another Sefer Torah and just to repeat the same berachot. Okay, now question on the first answer about the flaw. What, you worry every time you bring out two sefarim? It should be a problem that you can't have. People will say the first Torah is flawed. So is that true that you never bring out two sefarim? Sometimes you bring out three. ואמר רבי יצחק נפחה, ראש חודש טבת שחל להיות בשבת, מביא 3 תורות, וקורא אחת מעניינו של יום, ואחת של ראש חודש, ואחת בשל חנוכה. Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha says, when you have Rosh Chodesh, Tevet, and it's also Shabbat, and that's also Hanukkah. So you bring out 3 Sifrei Torah. This happens every so often. One of them you read Parashat HaShavua, and one of them you read about Rosh Chodesh, and one of them you read the section for Hanukkah. So here you're taking out 3 Sifrei Torah, and you don't worry about, people will say that the first 2 are pasul, so why can't the Kohen Gadol take out 2 Sifrei Torah? And the answer is Telata Gabre Betelata Sifrei Leka Pegama. Had Gabra Betel Sifrei Ika Pegama. If you have 3 different people, 3 olim reading from 3 Sifrei Torah, then that's totally fine. And that's what we do when we read from 2 or 3 Sifrei Torah. There's a different person reading from one, and then a different person reading from the other. In that case, there's no problem. People know, you're reading the next section, the next oleh. The problem is only if it's the same person reading from 2 different Sifrei Torah, because that's what would happen if there was a flaw in the Sefer Torah. Then that same person would stay there. They would put that Torah away and bring another Torah out, and that same person would be reading it. So because if it's the same person, it looks the same from just someone sitting in the audience, as if in a case where there is a mistake in the Torah. Therefore, we cannot do it with the Kohen Gadol. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol gets all the aliyot, so he's reading from both of them. So that's why he cannot have 2 Sifrei Torah. But otherwise, it's important to make sure not to give the same person 2 aliyot from 2 different Sifrei Torah back to back. Okay. Okay, then when he finishes reading the Torah and saying the Pesukim from Parashat Pinchas, then the Kohen says the 8 berachot, and this is why we mentioned this in the first place, that these berachot have to be recited in Hebrew. Baraita that elaborates on the Mishnah that the Kohen Gadol will bless on the Torah the same way that we bless in Bet Knesset, Noten HaTorah, and also regarding Avodah, like Reseh, Hoda'ah, like Modim, regarding Hashem forgiving sin, that's a Yom Kippur baracha, like the middle baracha in Shacharit of Yom Kippur, and then a blessing regarding the Bet HaMikdash, and regarding the Kohanim, and regarding all of Israel, and regarding Yerushalayim. V'asha'ar tefillah, and then he goes on and says the rest of the tefillah. Tenu Rabbanan, hashar tefillah, techina rina bakasha shamecha Yisrael sirichin livasha hotem be'shomea tefillah. So what is that? What is that continuation of the tefillah? This is the text that he should say. Supplication, song, request of your people in Israel. We are in need of redemption. And then you conclude that with Baruch Hashem Shomea Tefillah, like we have at the end of the Bakasha section in a regular Amidah. מכאן ואילך כל אחד ואחד מביא ספר תורה מתוך ביתו וקורא בו וכל כך למה? כדי להראות חזותו לרבים. And after that everybody brings a Sefer Torah from their home, their own Sefer Torah, and they all will read it. They'll read the sections of Yom Kippur and learn some Torah. And why is that important that everybody should bring their own Sefer Torah? Because then that shows it's a beautiful appearance in public, and how everybody loves Torah. This is going to be on the middle of Yom Kippur, and this is a beautiful way to follow up on the Kohen Gadol reading, teaching Torah to everyone, that everybody should come and bring their own Sefer Torah. Everybody should have a Sefer Torah that they can use to study, and then they have a study session, a reading Torah session. There is a question here about how everybody could bring their Sifrei Torah on Yom Kippur. Wouldn't they be carrying? One answer could be that they're all within the old city walls of Yerushalayim, so there's Eruv. But the more likely answer is that there is a machloket in Masechet Yoma about whether you're allowed to carry on Yom Kippur. Some say Yom Kippur is like Shabbat, you're not allowed to carry, and some say Yom Kippur is like Yom Tov, in which one is allowed to carry. So probably the statement is following the opinion that says one is permitted to carry on Yom Kippur, even though the halacha lema'aseh is not so. Next and last Mishnah, Parashat HaMelech Kesad, the king, when he's reading the Torah during Hakel, has to do so in Lashon HaKodesh. What is the procedure for Hakel? Mosei Yom Tov Harishon Shel Hag Bashemini B'Mosei Shiviri. Tosin lo Bima Shel Ais Ba'azara V'hu Yoshev Aleh Shene'emar Mecheh Sheva Shanim B'Moed. So on the end of the first Yom Tov of the Hag. So Hag means Sukkot. And this would be the conclusion of the first day of Sukkot. No, there's Yom Tov Rishon at the end of that day, that's the day and month, and the year would be the 8th year after a Shavuot year. So after the Shemitah year, the beginning of the next cycle, it would be that first Sukkot on the right after the first day of Sukkot. So they make on that day a stage out of wood in the temple courtyard, and the king would sit on that stage. Now, how do we know that this is the date? So here's the full pasuk. It says, Miketz Sheba Shanim, 7 years Shemitah. Miketz means the end. B'moed Shenat Shemitah b'Chag HaSukkot. It says there on Sukkot, Bebo Kol Yisrael Leraot et Pnei Hashem Elokecha. The Gemara is going to derive from something from each of these words. As at the time when everybody comes, the Gemara will say, this is at the time when everybody comes. That's the beginning of the holiday. That's why it's right after the beginning of the holiday, not at the end of the holiday. Now, Chazan HaKnesset notel Sefer Torah v'notna l'Rosh HaKnesset. Rosh HaKnesset notna l'Sagan, v'Sagan notna l'Kohen Gadol, v'Kohen Gadol notna l'Melech, v'Melech omed u'mekabel v'koreh v'yoshev. So just like we saw before regarding the Kohen Gadol, on Yom Kippur, here also the Hazan, meaning the attendant, the Gabbai of the Bet Knesset that is on Har HaBayit, will get the Sefer Torah and give it to the head, the president of the Knesset, who will give it to the deputy Kohen Gadol, gives it to the Kohen Gadol. Beforehand, it stopped at the Kohen Gadol, but now the Kohen Gadol gives it to the king. The king is even higher than the Kohen Gadol, and he will then stand up and receive it and read it and then sit back down. And now, here's a fascinating story about Agrippa Samelech Amad v'kibel v'kara omed v'shebechuhu chachamim v'shegele le'lo tuchal latet alecha ish nochri zalgu aynav demaot amru lo al titchere Agrippas achinu ata. Agrippas, King Agrippa, was a king that we know we know a bunch about. He was Herod the Great's grandson. Now, Herod the Great himself was not Jewish at all. His mother was a Nabatean Arab, and Herod's father was from a forcibly converted Edomites. So even if you say that conversion was good, which is problematic, certainly his mother was not. And now, this King Agrippa, his father was halachically Jewish because his father descended from Queen Mariamne. That's one of Herod's wives. She is a Hashmonai. She's the last of the Hasmoneans, who are fully Jewish, and therefore his father is halachically Jewish. However, Agrippa's mother is not Jewish. Agrippa's mother, Bernice, is a daughter of Herod's sister, and just as Herod is not Jewish, his sister is also not Jewish, and that's his mother's side. So Agrippa, therefore, although he has partial Jewish lineage, it was not halachically Jewish. Now, Agrippa was a king, and he's mixed reviews about Agrippa. On the one hand, he was friendly with the sages and supported them as one was on their side of the Pharisees, of the Chachamim. So in that sense, he was a good guy. On the other hand, he was also quite a shady character. When he was back in Rome, he made friends with Emperor Caligula, very, very evil emperor, and then with his successor and uncle Claudius. That's how he got this job in the first place, by being very loyal to them, and got into all kinds of trouble over there. So he is also a problematic figure. Now, when it came time for Hakel, when Agrippa was the king, he went and he did Hakel, because that's his job. And he went and he stood up, and the sages praised him for standing up, because as a king, usually a king sits down. That's his honor and respect, and he stood up in honor of the Torah. So sages gave him praise for that. Now, part of the reading of Hakel, as we're going to see in a second, is he reads Parashat HaMelech. He reads all the laws that a king has to do and cannot do. And now regarding king, it says you cannot appoint a king that's a foreigner over you. He has to be from among the Jewish people, cannot be a foreigner. And so when Agrippa read that, he didn't know this law before, he started crying because he knew that his ancestry was problematic and he was not fully Jewish. And so the people told him, the nation told him, don't worry, Agrippa, you are our brother, we consider you one of our own, you're good, you're not a foreigner. All right, now this we're going to see is going to be called flattery, and Gemara is going to have some harsh things to say about this, because it wasn't true. Now, back to the normal hakel, and the king will read from the beginning of Sefer Devarim until Shema, including the Shema paragraph, then read the Vayam Shamoa paragraph, second paragraph of the Shema. That's skipping to chapter 11. Aser te'aser, ki techale le'aser, and it's going to read two sections about giving ma'aser. One from Devarim 14, and the other one at near the end of Devarim, when it has the statement that the person brings, who brings the maaser, bi'ati hakodesh min habayit, which we discussed once. Parashat HaMelech u'berachot hakelalot. Then he goes backwards. It's a bit interesting that it seems to go out of order, but maybe because we want to have the two sections about maaser back to back. So then he goes back to Devarim 17, which is the laws about the king, and he reads the blessings and curses, and until he finishes the entire portion, that whole section of blessings and curses. Blessings and curses is the essential part of the berit, the consequences of keeping it, which makes an oath. Accepting it very serious. Okay, good. Berachot shekohen gadol mebarechotan, hamelech mebarechotan, ela shenoten shel regalim tachat mechilat ha'avon. Now the king will say the same berachot that the kohen recited, and he'll have to say them in Hebrew. He also says, except that he switches out, instead of about mechilat avon, about forgiving sin, because that was on Yom Kippur, which the Kohen said, he'll take that out and instead add a beracha for the holidays, because it is going to be on Sukkot. But otherwise, the berachot are the same. Good. Now the Gemara will analyze. B'shemini salkadatech says that it's going to be on the 8th. Now, 8th what? We're assuming now, so far, 8th day, right? Emma b'shemini, does it mean that Hakel is going to be on the 8th day, on Shemini Aseret? No, it means b'sheminit, on the 8th year of the sabbatical cycle, right after Shemitah year. Then the 8th year, which is the same as the first of the next cycle. That's what it means in the Mishnah. Where up here you can see when it says Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag B'Shemini B'Moseh Shabbat. The Shemini is explaining the Moseh Shabbat. It's not, but we already know it's Yom Tov Rishon, so it's clearly not Shemini Aseret. Now going back to this pasuk we already quoted above, why does it say so many descriptions? Mikeh, Sheva Shanim, B'Moed, Shanta Shemitah, Chag HaSukkot, B'Bo, Kol Yisrael. Why do I need all these words to just tell me a simple date? If it said at the end, if it only said at the end of 7 years, in other words, if it said only miketz Sheva Shanim, right, and it didn't say Shanata Shemitah, I would have said you start counting now from this year, which is the 40th year, when Moshe is telling them. So this will be year 1, and you count 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, that's when you do Hakel. But that's not necessarily the same as the Shemitah year, right? You might just say maybe it's its own cycle of every 7 years, independent of the Shemitah cycle. You might think that, and that's why it has to say Shemitah, that it's going to be over overlap. It'd be the same as the Shemitah cycle. And if it just said that Shemitah, I would say at the end of the Shemitah, like the end of Elul of the Shemitah year. I wouldn't know what's on Sukkot. That's why I have to say B'moed on the holiday. If it just said the holiday, I might think that's Rosh Hashanah. That's the first holiday after the Shemitah year, so that's why it has to say not just any Moed, but Chag HaSukkot. If it just said Sukkot, I might have thought it's at the end on Shemini Aseret, and therefore it says when everybody comes, when does everybody come to pilgrimage? They come for the beginning of the holiday, and that's how I know it's Motza'eh Yom Tov Rishon. וחזן הכנסת נוטל ספר תורה ונותנו לראש הכנסת. שמע פינה חולקין כבוד לתמיד במקום הרב. And now, same as discussion as we had on the previous daf, you have this whole procession of the Gabbai giving it to the president, giving it to the deputy, to the Kohen Gadol. So does that mean that we can learn from here that one is permitted to give honor to a student in front of the teacher, to a lower person in front of the higher person? Because here we're giving it to the Chazan and to the deputy. Even when the king is there, we're giving the lower people kavod, right? No, all that is not for the point is not for the honor, for the sake of the lower ones, but all that is actually to increase the honor of the king, to show, look how beautiful, how amazing the king is, that he's over and above all of these people. So having a longer, drawn out procession of giving the Torah one person to another only dramatizes how great the king is. Agrippa So Agrippa, he stood up and received the Torah, and the rabbis praised him for that. So if he stood up, that means he had been sitting. Hold on, how was he allowed to be sitting in the Temple Mount? So same question as yesterday regarding the Kohen Gadol. How could he be sitting? Don't we have a teaching that says that you're not allowed to sit in a temple courtyard except for a king from the Davidic dynasty, and Agrippa was not from the Davidic dynasty, so he wouldn't be allowed to be sitting in the first place. And the answer is Kedamar Rav Chisda Bezrat Nashim Hachanameh Bezrat Nashim, as Rav Chisda said at the very end of the daf yesterday. Rav Chisda said this, and so we're re-quoting him, that he said this is referring to in Ezrat Nashim, who's in the women's courtyard, which has a lower holiness of status than the main courtyard where the Mizbeach is, and therefore in that area one is permitted to sit. So that's what he was reading. So that's why he was allowed to sit. ושבחו חכמים, שבחו מקלד השפיר עבד, האמר רב אשי אפילו למאן דאמר נשיא, שמאכל כבודו כבודו מאכול, מלך שמאכל כבודו אין כבודו מאכול, שנאמר שום תשים עליך מלך, שתהא אימתו עליך. Now the sages praised him because he could have been sitting, he was in Ezrat Hanashim, and yet he showed respect for the Torah, and he forewent his own honor and stood up. So if the sages praised him, that means he did something good. But was it really good? After all, Rav Ashi said, even according to the opinion that says a nasi, right, the patriarch, the head of the Jewish community, like Rabbi Yehuda, Hanasi, if he wants to relinquish his honor, he's permitted to relinquish his honor, right? Nasi can do that because Nasi is kind of parallel to a king. When we had no more kings, the next best thing we had is a Nasi, but Nasi isn't quite as important as a king. So a Nasi is everybody owes him honor, but if he wants to forego his honor and say, no, don't worry, don't stand up for me, he can do that. But even according to that opinion, a king has no right to forego on his honor, because Pasuk says, place upon yourself a king, that his fear, his awe should be upon you. A king is representing the entire nation. So a king doesn't have a right to say, it's all right, right? If King Charles said, you know what, I don't want a coronation. I don't want to sit on a big throne. I don't want I just want to wear a baseball cap and sit on a sofa. It's more comfortable. He's not allowed to do that. He works for the nation, and we need to put him on a pedestal so that his fear will be upon everyone. So it's not up to the king to relinquish his honor. And so to here, Agrippa. Agrippa was not allowed to forego on his honor, and he should have been sitting down so that the awe of the people would be upon them. His awe would be upon the people. So the answer is misvah shaneh. No, here he's doing it for mitzvah. The King Agrippa wants to show his love for mitzvah by standing up to receive the Torah. That is praiseworthy for sure. He can forego his honor. Even a king can forego his honor for the sake of a mitzvah. He just can't forego his honor for personal reasons, because he is not just a personal individual. He represents the honor of the nation. Now, the Mishnah continues, says, when he got to the pasuk, as he was reading, I guess it was the first time he was ever reading the Torah. He was king, but he didn't know this before. He reads the pasuk that says, you're not allowed to have a foreigner. תנא משמד רבי נתן, באותה שעה נתחייבו שונאי ישראל כליה שהניפו לו לאגריפה. So, at that time, the enemies of Israel were deserving of destruction. This is a euphemism. It means Israel, the Jewish people themselves. Why? Because they committed flattery to Agrippa. Really, Agrippa was not worthy. And the proper thing would have been to say, you're right, Agrippa, you're not worthy to be king, right? Get out, and let's pick a proper king. But instead, because he was the power in charge, so the people there gave him flattery instead, and they were deserving of destruction because of that. And now we're going to go into a long agadah about flattery. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Halafta, ביום שגבר אגרופה של חנופה נתעוותו הדינים נתקלקלו מעשים ואין אדם יכול לומר לחברו מעשי גדולים ממעשיך. From the day that the power, Agrippa, not related to the word Agrippa, the power of Chanupah prevailed, and people are being are flattering more. Judgment has been corrupted, and the people's deeds have been corrupted, and the person can no longer say to another person, "My deeds are greater than yours." In other words, in order to be one explanation is in order to have a proper justice in society, you need people who are upright without blame, that they could call out when things are going wrong. But when a society is full of flattery and everybody is a hypocrite, then nobody can stand up and say what you're doing is wrong, because then the people will just say back, "Oh, who are you to talk? Yours, and you're even worse." And so that's what happens when there are flatterers, and then people who are really lowlives end up being in charge. So then that corrupts the whole society and the whole legal system and everything that's right. Darash Rabbi Yehuda bar Ma'araba. ויתאמר רבי שמעון בן פזי, מותר להחניף לשם בעולם הזה, שנאמר לא יקרא עוד לנבל נדיב ולחילי, לא יאמר שועה. מכלל בעולם הזה שרה. So Rabbi Yehuda of the West, and some said Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said, disagree. They say it's permitted to flatter wicked people in this world, because Yeshaya talks about the future, right? In the future, when there's redemption, then the vile person shall no longer be called generous, and nor shall the churl be called noble. Means in the future, everything will be honest, and good people will be in charge, and you won't have to flatter anymore. But right now, sometimes you need to flatter. When there's an oppressive government, thugs around, and they're going to threaten your life unless you flatter them. So then, you know what? Flatter them and live another day and hope for redemption soon. So they're saying, be practical, and sometimes we're in tough situations, and we need to do so. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amar mehacha kirot penei Elohim v'atirseni. Or another source for the same teaching is when Yaakov meets Esav. Esav's coming with all his big army to destroy Yaakov. and then they make up. So Yaakov says, I see your face like an angel, and you were pleased with me. Yaakov here looks like he's flattering Esav. Esav was like an angel? Really? Right? Even if Esav was, calm down and forgiving, you can say some nice things, but to call him like an angel, that sounds like flattery. Yet Yaakov did it because he didn't want any trouble. He didn't want Esav to come and kill his family. And so, you see, when you're under pressure, it's permitted to flatter. However, this interpretation of Yaakov and Esav is the opposite of that of Rabbi Levi, who gave a parable regarding what Yaakov said to Esav. זה שאני טועם כתבשיל שטעמתי בבית המלך, אמר, ידע למלכה, מסתפה ולקטי לה. It's like someone who invited over his friend to come eat with him. The guest, when he shows up, realizes that the host is not being kind, but the host has plans to murder this guest. That's why he invited him over. He's going to murder him. And so the guest, so as he starts eating the food, he says, oh, the taste of this food is so good. It tastes just like the dish that I ate in the king's hut in the king's house. So then the host realized, oh, he knows the king. I'm going to be afraid and I'm not going to kill him. So in other words, it's a subtle a way of indicating that, listen, I know the king. You're not going to say it outright because, he won't be believed. And he's going to say, why are you saying that? So you just, in a roundabout way, say, yeah, I'm friends with the king, right? So you feel threatened. You say, oh, by the way, the other day I was talking to the head of the FBI. Oh, he knows the head of the FBI? Okay, you know what? We're not going to mess with this guy. Okay, so too, Yaakov, happens to be Yaakov also was making a dish, but that's not actually related to the mashal and the similarity to Yaakov, but rather when Yaakov said, your face, Esav, is like that of angels. So then Esav would be thinking, oh, he knows the angels, right? He's seen them? Oh, this is a holy person. I better not start up with Yaakov, right? Because he knows the higher ups there. Okay, good. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kol Adam sheyesh lo chanupa mebi af la'olam shnemar v'chanfe leb yasimu af. Elod ela shen tefilaton nishma shnemar lo yeshave'u ki asaram. Anyone who has flattery brings anger to the world. As it says, those who flatter with their hearts bring about anger. And not only that, their prayers will not be heard. As it says, when Hashem asaram, when Hashem afflicts them, binds them, their cries will not be listened to. Okay, now we have a mnemonic for several statements by Rabbi Elazar. The mnemonic is af ubad gehinam biyado nida gola. So let's see, first is going to be, the first one was af, we just saw it, and the next one is about ubad. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, kol adam sheyesh bo chanupa, afilu ubarin shebemeiman mekalilin oto shnemar, omer larasha sadik ata, yekebuhu amim, yizamuhu leomim, ve'en kob ela kela shnemar lo kabo el, ve'en leom ela ubarin shnemar ul'om, mil'om ye'emas. Anyone who flatters, even, everybody's disgusted of flattery, even fetuses in the mother's wombs hear that flattery and they curse that guy. As it says, someone who tells an evil person, you are righteous, so the nations will curse him. Nations will, another way of saying nations will curse him. Peoples will execrate him. So the word kov means curse, which we also see from Bamidbar regarding Bilam. And the word leom means nation, but here what they're taking it to mean fetuses, because the oracle tells Rivka that one nation will be stronger than the other, but it's referring to fetuses. So here in this pasuk, le'umim means fetuses, and they are going to curse the one who tells an evil person that he is righteous. אמר רבי אלעזר, כל אדם שיש בו חנופה נופל בגיהינום שנאמר, הוי עומדים לרע טוב ולטוב רע וגומר. מה כתיב אחריו? לכן, כאכול קש לשון אש וחשש להבה ירפה. Anyone who has flattery in him will go to Gehinam, because it's written, therefore, as pasuk says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. That's flattery, and says that they will be burnt like fire to devour straw, like chaff is consumed by fire, and that's a good description for Gehinam. The word Gehinam comes from an actual place, Ge Ben Hinnom, which you can go to. It's right outside the southern walls of the old city of Jerusalem. It's a valley where they used to worship Molech, and they would pass their children through fire. So that's where this theme comes from, a place of terrible destruction, sin, punishment, that where people are burned by fire. Is based on a real place. It's more peaceful now. ואמר רבי אלעזר, כל המחניף לחברו נופל, סוף נופל בידו, ואם אינו נופל בידו, נופל ביד בניו, ואם אינו נופל ביד בניו, נופל ביד Ben Benom. So Rabbi Elazar further teaches that anyone who flatters someone else in the end will fall into his hands. Flattery just temporarily will get the guy to like you, but in the end, you're going to suffer under his hands. And if not his hands, his son. And if not his son, then his grandson. Right? A flattery will only work for so long. How do we know this? Shneimar, Vayomer Yirmiyah hanavi laChananya, Amen ken ya'aseh Hashem yakem Hashem et debarecha. Hananiah was a false prophet. Hananiah, the false prophet, said after Galut Yehoiachin, says, don't worry, everybody will come back from Galut after 2 years. Right? This is just a temporary setback. The Beit HaMikdash will not be destroyed. Everything will be fine. And Yirmiyah sarcastically said, Amen. May it be Hashem's will that everybody comes back from exile after 2 years and everything is fine. He meant it sarcastically, meaning you're false, but nevertheless, because he said Amen to the statement of a false prophet, this is a subtle form of flattery. And Yirmiyah himself was punished by the grandchild of Hananiah for even he should have said outright, you're a false prophet, you deserve death, everything you said is wrong. And by even saying something that even sounds nice, even though he really meant it sarcastically, Yirmiyah was punished. How do we see that? The Ketiv. There's a few perakim later. Vayihu b'shar Binyamin v'sham Baal pikidut u'shmo Yir'iyah ben Shelemiyah ben Hananiah v'itposet Yirmiyah navi lemor el kastim ata nofel v'yomer lo Yirmiyah sheker enino nofel el kastim v'gomer uchti v'itpos Yirmiyahu v'yibiehu el hasarim. In this scene, Yirmiyah is at the gates of Yerushalayim trying to leave the city. This is when Jerusalem was under siege, and temporarily the siege was lifted. It was being besieged by the Babylonians, but then the Egyptians came, and so the Babylonians were distracted, and so Yirmiyah wanted to leave so that he could take care of a field that he had bought. However, as he was there, the guard, his name was Ben Shelmiah ben Hananiah. Now, Peshat is not necessarily the same Hananiah as that false prophet, but if it is the same person, then this is his grandson, captures Yirmiyah and said, why are you leaving the city? I know you're going to have a meeting with the Babylonians and you're going to try to make a peace deal with the You're falling to the Babylonians. You're collaborating with them. And Yirmiyah says, no, this is a lie. I am not going to collaborate with the Kasdim. Nevertheless, they captured Yirmiyah and brought him to the princes, and they punished him. And so you see that Yirmiyah, why was he punished? Because he flattered Hananiah by saying, even though it was sarcastic, by saying, yes, amen, may it be your will, may it be God's will that your words should come true, because he said those words that sounded like flattery. Therefore, he was punished in the hands of Hananiah's grandson. אמר רבי אלעזר, כל עדה שיש בה חנופה מעושה כנידה, שנאמר כי עדת חנף גלמוד, שכן בכרכי הים קוראים לנידה גלמודה. מהי גלמודה? גמולה מבעלה. Any congregation in which there is flattery is repulsive, like a nida. As it says, עדת חנף גלמוד, a flattering congregation is galmud. What does galmud means? It means alone, that nobody wants to be with that person. Out in the cities overseas, it's not the common Hebrew around where the rabbis were lived, but they heard of a dialect where the nida is called galmuda. What does galmuda mean? Separated from her husband. ואמר רבי אלעזר, כל עדה שיש בה חנופה Lesof gola, in the congregation where there's a lot of flattery will end up being exiled. So from the same pasuk in Iyov that says the congregation of flatterers will be galmud, and another pasuk says seeing that I bereave my children, I am solitary galmuda, and also says gola. So there's 4 words here that are all equivalent. So shechola means without children, solitary, exiled, and wandering. So since we see galmuda and gola are equivalent, therefore anyone who any congregation where there are flatterers will be galmud will be exiled. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah abad abba kitot en mekabbelot pene shechina kat lesim kat chanefim v'kat shakarim v'kat mesapere lashon hada. 4 groups of people that do not deserve to greet the divine presence. And who are they? Lesim, mocker, people that are mock everything, people that are flatterers, liars, and people that say gossip. How do we know each one? Cynics or mockers, that Hashem draws his hand away from them. Hashem Yov says, flatterer cannot come before God. He doesn't want to be around them. Tehillim says, he who speaks falsehood will not dwell before me. Kat mesapere lashon hara dichtiv ki lo el hafes resha ata lo yigurecha ra sadik ata Hashem lo yagur b'mgurecha ra. And those who are slanderers, who speak lashon hara, pasuk in Tehillim says, you Hashem are not a God who loves wicked. And the opposite, right? You will not dwell with evil. Rasha meaning lashon hara. Hashem is sadik, and therefore he will not dwell with those who speak evil. And so that's a nice conclusion to an entire perek that's about lashon hakodesh. We should always use our words for holiness and for good, and never for flattery or for lashon hara. Hadran alach elu ne'emarin.